Alright, let's start with Superfast 50. Prime Minister Modi is on a two-day visit to Egypt, marking the first bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister after 26 years. Prime Minister Modi was welcomed at the Cairo airport by Egyptian counterpart. Prime Minister is on a two-day visit after wrapping up the successful historic visit to the US. Prime Minister Modi was greeted with a ceremonial welcome and a guard of honor upon his arrival at the Cairo airport. The Prime Minister was received by the Egyptian counterpart. The Prime Minister also received a rousing reception by the Indian diaspora as he arrived at his hotel in Cairo.
We are honored for the Prime Minister visit to Egypt and welcome. He is always welcome to be here within us.
Prime Minister Modi also held a roundtable meet with his Egyptian counterpart in Cairo, according to the Indian ambassador to Egypt. This was for the first time that a roundtable meet was held between Prime Minister Modi and the Egyptian Prime Minister. On the very first day of Egypt visit, Prime Minister Modi interacted with Indian community in Cairo. In his interaction with them, Prime Minister Modi lauded the community for their contribution towards strengthening India-Egypt ties. Prime Minister Modi on Saturday met the Grand Mufti of Egypt and even discussed issues related to promoting social harmony and countering extremism and radicalization. Prime Minister Modi also met the members of the Bora community of the Indian diaspora in Cairo on his day one of Egypt visit. While prioritizing the trade boost, Prime Minister Modi met prominent personalities in Egypt as well. In his visit, the Prime Minister even interacted with two prominent young yoga instructors in Cairo. He praised them for their commitment to yoga and even encouraged them to visit the country.
I was very impressed about how he's very keen about the yoga community in Egypt and how he aspires to bring more and more intellectuality and information to the yoga community in Egypt.
In a series of engagements lined up for day two in Egypt, Prime Minister Modi will spend day two for half an hour today at the Al-Hakim Mosque. The Prime Minister will even meet Egyptian President later in the day. In a massive breakthrough, the Wagner chief has announced that his forces were turning around from a march towards Moscow. The announcement comes as the Belarusian government claimed President had reached a deal with Wagner boss to halt the march of his forces in Moscow. And in more news from across the country, as the Kremlin versus Wagner fight escalated, Kremlin has announced that their rebellion group led by Wagner will now move to neighboring Belarus. Residents of southern Russian city of Rostov were seen queuing at the petrol stations on Saturday after mercenary chief declared an armed rebellion aimed at ousting Russian defense minister. Meanwhile, the Italian premier said on Saturday that she was monitoring events in Russia closely. This hours before finally an announcement was made that Wagner chief would retreat to Belarus. The Wagner chief on Saturday said that his convoy to Rostov was targeted by Russian artillery fire and military aircraft. In a latest audio recording shared on the Telegram channel, the Wagner chief claimed that his rebellion enjoyed widespread support from Russian citizens who were unfurling Wagner PMC flags. Locals in Kiev voiced their opinion on developments in Russia and how it may affect the situation for Ukraine as they visited an exhibit of damaged artillery on Saturday in Russian cities. Meanwhile, the Russian mercenary chief released an audio recording on Saturday stating that the cash found during search of his St. Petersburg office was intended for salaries and compensation for fighters killed in action. Recruitment banners for Wagner mercenary group were seen being taken down from billboards on Saturday. It comes as Russian authorities tackled an armed rebellion that was spearheaded by the Wagner chief. Now, footage has surfaced from regions between Moscow and southern Russia that showed rushed measures to create roadblocks for the advancing Wagner rebel troops just hours before the rebel group finally retreated. Armored vehicles were parked on the streets in Rostov on Saturday outside the General Staff Office of the Southern Military District of Russia. The mercenary chief claimed that his troops entered southern Russia city without a single shot, adding that no one was killed during what he called a march of justice. The Russian mercenary leader has meanwhile denied Russian president's allegation of betrayal as he defended the actions of mercenary units that he claimed have entered Russia from Ukraine. And in more news from across the globe, military vehicles were seen on the streets of central Moscow early on Saturday after the owner of the Wagner group escalated his direct challenge to the Kremlin. The owner of the Wagner private military contractor who called for an armed rebellion aimed at ousting Russia's defense minister claimed in a video that his troops along with him have taken control of the military command center in Rostov region. Meanwhile, the police were seen outside the Wagner Center in St. Petersburg on Saturday after the group chief declared armed rebellion aimed at ousting Russia's defense minister. Russia's security services, meanwhile, responded to the Wagner chief's declaration of an armed rebellion by calling for his arrest. Armed troops in uniform and military vehicles, including tanks, were seen on the streets of Rostov in Russia as the Wagner claimed to have laid siege to the Russian city. Firefighters were tackling a large blaze at a fuel depot that was set ablaze as the Kremlin versus Wagner face-off escalated. Roadblocks were also set up around Moscow's perimeter on Saturday as Russian authorities declared a counter-terrorist regime in response to an armed rebellion that was spearheaded by the Wagner chief. The Russian state television on Saturday showed crowds running in the streets of Rostov after mercenary chief led his troops out of Ukraine and into the key southern Russian city. People in Moscow reacted on Saturday to the declaration of war by Wagner chief hours before the Wagner finally retreated to Belarus. And the arrest of And in more news from Russia, where the streets in Russia's capital were, however, quiet as Wagner chief escalated his direct challenge to the Kremlin, calling for an armed rebellion aimed at ousting Russia's defense minister. The latest, of course, being the criminal charges against Wagner chief being dropped by the Kremlin. And more from across the globe, an American aircraft carrier was due to make a port call in Vietnam, a rare visit by one of US Navy's biggest ship that comes as Washington and Beijing both stepped up to bolster ties.